Imagine just for a second that you are the king of Spain in the early 1500s. You rule this massive, truly global empire. Gold is just flowing in from the Americas. You're fighting these wars all over Europe.
And your desk is completely buried under like a mountain of royal decrees. I mean, the bureaucracy at that time was absolutely paralyzing.
Right, exactly. So when a problem hits your desk that's just too complex or, too sticky or politically sensitive to run through the official channels, you don't turn to your generals. You don't turn to a committee.
You definitely don't.
You turn to one specific guy from one specific family and you just say, have Vargas look into it.
Yeah, it was basically the 16th century equivalent of having a geopolitical fixer on speed dial. That phrase actually became so common, it turned into a popular catchphrase across the entire Spanish Empire.
Which is wild. And that name, Vargas, is something you still see everywhere today. I mean, if you look at the global census data right now, 22.2% of all people with the surname Vargas live in Mexico.
Yeah, almost a quarter.
Yeah, it is incredibly widespread. You almost certainly know a Vargas or, you've read a novel by one or watched one play a professional sport. But we usually just treat surnames like invisible name tags. We don't really stop to ask how a single bloodline managed to embed itself so deeply into the fabric of the world.
Which is a missed opportunity, really, because a name isn't just some linguistic tag. It's a compressed historical artifact. If you know how to decode it, it carries centuries of migrations, wars, economic crashes, and, well, just sheer human desperation.
And decoding it is exactly our mission for you today. We are going 1,000 years deep into the history and origins of the House of Vargas. We're going to peel back the layers of these historical chronicles, genealogical essays, university research, all of it, to really trace this family's evolution.
It's an incredible journey.
It really is. It's a story that intertwines Roman senators, patron saints, the brutal reconquest of Spain, and this crazy secret double life during the colonization of the Americas.
Yeah, and we can actually track this single lineage from its hazy, almost mythological origins all the way to its massive modern footprint. But, to understand how the Vargas name eventually crossed oceans, we really have to start with how they first justified their power in Spain.
Right, and if you look at the earliest records trying to pinpoint the very first Vargas, the origin story is, well, it's a complete mess of contradictions.
It really is. The historical documents offer wildly different theories, and they obviously can't all be true. Some of the older genealogists, they confidently claim the family descends from a noble Roman senator named Lucius Barguntus, who was mentioned by the ancient historian Sallust.
Okay, so they claim this heavy Roman gravitas, but then you turn the page and another scholar insists the name has Gothic roots from the warlords who ruled after Rome fell.
Right.
And then there's a completely different theory. The scholar Covarrubias suggests Vargas comes from an Arabic phrase meaning Padre Bueno, or good father.
And it doesn't even stop at the people. The geographic claims are equally all over the place. There's this persistent theory tying the name to the ancient river Vargas in Thrace, way out in Eastern Europe, which was noted by the Roman author Pliny.
Wait, Thrace?
Yeah, Thrace. The claim is that this ancient Thracian river actually inspired the blue and white waves that sit right in the center of the Vargas family coat of arms.
Okay, let's just pause here for a second because this is fascinating to me from a human behavior standpoint. You have a Roman senator, a Gothic root, an Arabic phrase for good father, and an ancient river in Thrace.
It's a lot.
Chronologically and culturally, these totally cancel each other out. This feels exactly like modern corporate branding, where a company just throws a bunch of impressive-sounding buzzwords onto their website to see what sticks.
That's actually a highly accurate way to look at medieval nobility. We have to remember how power worked back then. Legitimacy wasn't just about how many swords you had, it was about the narrative you could weave.
So it was pure PR.
Exactly. If you were a rising noble family in the Middle Ages, establishing an ancient, almost mythological pedigree was a survival tactic. You wanted the civilized weight of Rome, the local, rugged authority of the Goths, and maybe a touch of ancient mysticism from Thrace. It didn't matter if it was contradictory, it just mattered that it sounded ancient and indisputable.
But eventually we have to move out of the branding exercise and into hard, verifiable history. And that first real anchor drops in the year 1083.
Yes, 1083. This is right in the middle of the Reconquista, the centuries-long Christian reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula from the Moorish rulers. King Alfonso VI took the strategic cities of Madrid and Toledo, and fighting fiercely on the front lines for him were three brothers bearing the name Vargas.
And they were pretty vital to the campaign, right?
Oh, absolutely instrumental in breaking the city defenses.
And in medieval warfare, you don't just get a medal for that kind of service, you get real estate.
Right? The whole mechanism of the Reconquista relied on that exact exchange. The king conquers a territory, but he can't stay there to guard it. He needs loyal, violent men to hold the newly drawn borders. So he grants the Vargas brothers lands. The second brother settled in Toledo, while the eldest and the youngest laid down their roots in Madrid.
And that eldest brother staying in Madrid is basically the bedrock of the family's absolute dominance in that city. But they weren't just managing farms, they were border lords. They were so renowned for their martial aggression that they earned this famous poetic moniker. The poet Quintana actually wrote, "Las Vargas son gavilanes." The Vargases are hawks.
Just think about what it took to survive an 11th century Castile. You had to be a predator. Being a hawk wasn't just a polite compliment about their bravery. It meant they were the military elite, constantly swooping down to secure contested territory for the crown and, well, enriching themselves in the process. They were deeply feared.
But fear only gets a family so far, I think. Because right after they establish themselves as these bloodthirsty hawks, the historical records show them making a massive pivot. They suddenly become intimately connected to divinity, miracles, and the church.
It's one of the most brilliant strategic evolutions in noble history, honestly.
Yeah.
By the 11th and 12th centuries, the family is very wealthy. A prominent knight and landowner named Ivan, sometimes he's recorded as Juan de Vargas, he employs a poor, humble peasant to work his vast agricultural estates.
A man named Isidro.
Yes, a man who would eventually be canonized as San Isidro Labrador, Saint Isidore the Farmer, the patron saint of Madrid. But long before the sainthood, Isidro was just a laborer toiling in the Vargas dirt.
And this is where the chronicles just explode with these vivid supernatural events happening specifically on Vargas property. Like the story where Ivan's other farmhands complain that Isidro's showing up late because he's at church.
Right, the plowing story.
Yeah. Ivan goes out to reprimand him, but he finds Isidro deep in prayer under a tree while angels are literally driving the oxen and plowing the fields for him.
Doing double the work of a normal peasant, no less. But notice how these miracles directly benefit the physical needs of the Vargas estate. On another occasion, Ivan de Vargas was inspecting his dry fields in the sweltering heat, completely parched. Isidro simply strikes the dry earth with his goad, and a spring of fresh, pure water miraculously bursts out to quench his master's thirst.
Okay, wait. I have to call out a massive contradiction here in the sources.
Sure.
Earlier, we talked about the Vargas coat of arms having those blue and white waves, right? And the old genealogists claim they represented that ancient river in Thrace.
The Pliny connection, yeah.
But the Spanish chronicles from Madrid explicitly claim those exact same blue and white waves on the family crest represent the miraculous spring that San Isidro brought forth for Ivan de Vargas. I mean, it can't be an ancient Thracian river and a 12th century miraculous spring in Madrid.
Well, it can't be both historically, but it perfectly illustrates how families continually rewrite their own mythology. As the legend of San Isidro grew, he became the spiritual center of Madrid. The Vargas family realized something crucial. Claiming a distant, obscure Thracian river is neat trivia, but claiming that God himself altered the landscape of your private property. That completely aligns the family with the divine favor.
It's like a modern defense contractor suddenly pivoting their entire public image to become a massive philanthropy organization. They go from the hawks to the protectors of saints.
That's a perfect analogy. The shift secures a totally different kind of power. And the miracles get deeply personal, too. Isidro multiplied a pot of stew to feed hungry guests. He saved his own infant son from a well by praying until the water level miraculously rose to the surface.
And there was one with Ivan's daughter, right?
Yes, the ultimate favor to his employer. Isidro allegedly raised Ivan de Vargas' own deceased daughter, Maria, from the dead.
Wow. So because of all this, the Vargas family basically becomes untouchable. By the winter of 1214, when St. Francis of Assisi is traveling through Spain and needs land in Madrid to build a convent, who provides the property? The Vargas family, they are literally supplying the real estate for the holiest men in Europe.
And how do you translate that kind of divine real estate into secular power? You leverage it to get inside the royal court. Having military might makes you useful. Having divine favor makes you legitimate. But combining both, that makes you indispensable to the monarchy.
Which brings us to the absolute titans of the Vargas bloodline. Men who weren't just fighting on the borders, but who were shaping the empire itself. Let's look at Garcia Perez de Vargas in the 13th century.
Garcia Perez was a legendary captain under the Saint King Ferdinand III. He fought in the brutal conquests of Cordoba and Jaen, but his masterpiece, his real claim to fame, was the siege and capture of Sevilla in 1248.
His contribution to taking Sevilla was so monumental that the city actually carved his name into one of its main gateways. The inscription in the sources is wild. It basically says, "Hercules built me, Julius Caesar surrounded me with walls, and the Saint King conquered me with Garci Perez de Vargas."
Placing a Vargas on the exact same pedestal as Hercules and Julius Caesar is just the ultimate piece of medieval propaganda. It cements them not just as lords, but as historical giants. But, while Garci Perez represented the peak of their military usefulness, the peak of their political influence comes a couple of centuries later with Francisco de Vargas.
Right. Francisco de Vargas operates in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. He is serving Ferdinand and Isabella, the Catholic monarchs, and later the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. But he isn't swinging a sword.
No, Francisco was a master of the bureaucratic machine. He held titles like the Accountant Major of Accounts, the Treasurer General, and the Chancellor of Castile. The Spanish Empire at this point was buckling under its own administrative weight. The Council of Castile was notoriously slow.
Just bogged down in paperwork.
Exactly. So if the monarchs needed something done quietly, efficiently, or off the books, they bypassed the councils and went straight to Francisco.
And this is where that catchphrase from earlier comes from. If the king was stuck, the default answer was just, "Averguilo Vargas." Have Vargas figure it out. He was like the ultimate White House chief of staff, or just like human Google for the king.
Google is a great way to put it. It entered the cultural lexicon so deeply that the famous playwright, Tirso de Molina, even used it as the title of a play. Francisco de Vargas was the man holding the keys to the empire's back doors.
And you can see the physical manifestation of that power in Madrid. Francisco owned massive properties, including the sprawling Casa de Campo estate, situated right across the river from the royal palace. Eventually, King Philip II decides he wants that land for a royal country estate and buys it from the family.
But the transaction came with a very telling detail. When someone at court asked King Philip II why he hadn't removed the Vargas family coat of arms from the buildings he had just purchased for the crown, Philip actually refused to take them down.
Yeah, his exact words were, "Leave them, for those of such loyal vassals look well on the royal house." The king of the largest empire on earth felt that his own royal properties were elevated by having the Vargas crest on them. That is the absolute zenith of their power.
It really is. But maintaining that kind of proximity to the crown carries a hidden, compounding cost. Which brings us to a harsh historical reality. Centuries of immense political influence and sprawling land ownership do not necessarily equate to liquid cash.
Which perfectly sets up the tragic irony of the 17th century. I mean, how does a family with their name on a royal palace end up with a leaking roof on their own house?
You have to look at the macroeconomic collapse of Spain. By the 1600s, the Spanish Empire is bleeding out. Decades of constant warfare across Europe, combined with massive inflation, mostly caused by the influx of silver from the Americas, it completely wrecked the domestic economy.
Just totally destabilized it.
Yeah, there were depressions, currency devaluations, and bread riots. And the nobility, who were legally barred from engaging in common commerce, were caught right in the middle.
This economic trap brings us to the most fascinating figure we found in the records. Diego de Vargas, born in Madrid in 1643. He is the only male heir of his direct line. He's carrying the weight of the hawks, the saint protectors, the counselors.
His grandfather, Lorenzo, had spent 50 years fighting in Italy and North Africa for the crown. Diego inherits all that prestige. But what he actually inherits on paper is what he grimly referred to as miserables mayorazgos. My miserable entailed estates.
We really need to explain what an entailed estate or a mayorazgo actually is, because it's the key to his whole miserable situation.
Right. It's a legal structure designed to keep noble lands intact across generations. It meant Diego owned the estates, but he was legally prohibited from selling them, dividing them, or even heavily mortgaging them.
Wow.
Yeah, he was land rich, but incredibly cash poor. The land was tied to the bloodline forever, regardless of whether it was actually generating any income.
So he's trapped in a gilded cage. And the notary records detailing his expenses from the 1660s are incredibly revealing. He is desperately trying to maintain the illusion of wealth. He's paying for grammar lessons, dancing lessons, a manservant. He buys a velvet suit, silk stockings, and like 22 pairs of shoes in a single year just to look the part of a courtier.
He had to keep up appearances because visibility at court was the only way to secure a royal appointment, which was literally his only path to an actual salary. But behind the silk stockings, his properties were falling apart. In 1667, he actually had to beg the crown for special legal permission to borrow money against his entailed estates just to do emergency maintenance.
The records of the damage are almost comical. Tile roofs are smashed, the brick floors are ruined, the roof of his ancestral home is actively leaking. There's even a note that the secret stairway down to the latrines was sinking.
It's the perfect metaphor for the late Spanish Empire. A beautiful ancient facade that is literally crumbling into the latrines.
Diego is basically living out the plot of Don Quixote. He knows he's a Vargas. He knows his ancestors employed a saint and advised emperors. He's trying to be this noble warrior knight, but in reality, he's drowning in debt. And that immense pressure, the need to live up to the legacy while facing financial ruin, forces him to make a radical decision.
Yeah. In 1672, realizing he will never make his fortune in the stagnant economy of Madrid, Diego de Vargas decides to gamble everything on the New World. He leaves his wife and his legitimate children behind in Spain and sails for the Americas.
But once he gets there, the story takes a very human, very messy turn. He's writing these letters back home to Spain, and apparently his handwriting was terrible and his grammar was worse, constantly complaining about how homesick he is and how much he needs money. But while he's projecting this image of the suffering, dutiful noble back to Europe, he's secretly living a double life.
He established a completely separate, illegitimate family in Mexico City. He had at least 3 children with a woman there whom he never married.
Think about the psychological pressure of that. It's the 17th century equivalent of an Instagram highlight reel. He's projecting the struggling, loyal patriarch back to his legal wife in Spain while fully embedding himself into a new life in Mexico that he can never, ever talk about. And we only know how much that second family meant to him because of his final will.
Yes. In his last will and testament, despite all his grand titles and legal heirs in Spain, those 3 Mexican-born children are the only relatives he explicitly mentions and tries to provide for.
But Diego didn't just hide out in Mexico City. He was still totally obsessed with redeeming the Vargas name. Following the massive Pueblo Indian uprising in New Mexico, Diego actually self-funded a military expedition. In 1692, through a mix of diplomacy, sheer force of will, and brutal military strategy, he became the reconqueror of New Mexico.
He was trying to resurrect the old identity. He was trying to be the hawk again, hoping that a massive military victory on the frontier would bring the wealth and royal favor needed to fix his crumbling estates back in Madrid.
He wanted validation so badly that he begged his son-in-law back in Spain to secure him a membership in the Order of Santiago.
The Order of Santiago was the ultimate social currency in Spain. It proved your blood was pure and your deeds were heroic. His father, his grandfather, and his great-grandfather had all worn the red dagger cross of the order. For Diego, getting that habit wasn't just an honor. It was proof that he hadn't failed his bloodline.
But the tragedy is, he never gets it. Despite reconquering an entire territory for the crown, he is denied entry. The bureaucratic machine that his ancestor Francisco used to control now worked against him. He didn't have enough liquid wealth in Spain, his political enemies blocked him, and there were lingering legal charges against him in Mexico.
He died in Bernalillo, New Mexico in 1704, and the records show he died owing 4,000 pesos to the royal treasury. He spent his entire life chasing the ghost of Garcia Perez on the Sevilla gates, but he died in debt, thousands of miles from home, on the absolute ragged edge of the empire.
Yet, in that failure to return to Spain, Diego inadvertently accomplished something much larger. He firmly planted the Vargas name in the Americas, setting the stage for it to become the global phenomenon it is today.
The arc of this family perfectly mirrors the arc of human history over the last millennium. They started as violent border lords securing territory. They evolved into sophisticated political operators and patrons of the church to consolidate their power. And when the old European systems collapsed, they pushed outward into the new world out of sheer economic desperation.
And because of that centuries-long push, the name Vargas is everywhere. It's shared by presidents across Latin America. It's the name of the Nobel laureate Mario Vargas Llosa. It's on the jerseys of countless athletes, and it's woven into the family trees of millions of everyday people who carry that legacy without even realizing it.
It really reframes how you look at a census or a phone directory. You aren't just looking at names, you're looking at the survivors of history.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We've spent this entire time tracking how the lords of the House of Vargas carefully built their legacy. They used swords, they used royal decrees, they used sprawling estates.
Yeah, all the traditional levers of power.
But when you actually go to Madrid today, Their most enduring, permanent cultural legacy isn't a battlefield victory, it is the miracles of San Isidro. And those miracles weren't performed by a Vargas knight or a Vargas counselor or a Vargas explorer. They were performed by the humble, impoverished peasant who worked in their dirt, the man they paid to plow their fields.
That's a really powerful point.
It raises a profound question when we look back at the grand sweep of history. Who truly builds a family's historical legacy? Is it the people who own the land, or is it the people who toil on it?
That is the ultimate irony of their power. The lords may have owned the fields, but the laborer owns the history.
Something to think about the next time you hear the name Vargas. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.